So what is harmony? The simultaneous sounding of tones and the relationships between them. Another way to think about this is to just play two notes or more at the same time. In the same way that when we read tabs, when notes are stacked on top of one another, we play them at the same time, harmonically. Harmony is all about relationships, ratio, and proportion. Relativity between the notes. When referring to harmony, we mean chords and chord progressions. And I'll be using these words interchangeably. Chords. What are these things anyway? A chord is the simultaneous playing of multiple notes, generally at least 3. We just talked about this. It's a collection or grouping of notes. And there are many types of chords. They're categorized by the number of notes, highest scale degree, and other factors. So the root note. This is the central generating tone of a chord, in the same way that C is the central generating tone of a C major scale. All chords have root notes, and it's the note which most simply explains the presence of the others. It gives the other notes their meaning. The root is not always in the bass. Bass in the context of a chord just meaning the lowest pitch of that chord, the bass note. A chord where the root note is not in the bass is called an inversion. Inversions are a vast topic that could easily be its own course. All chords presented here will be in root position. This just means that the root note will always be in the bass of the chords that we play. There are 3 types of inversions we could think of it. There are root position chords, where the root of the chord is in the bass. So what's this mean? It's telling us C/E. This is saying what type of chord is it? So a C major chord. And it's saying that the note E is in the bass of that chord. E is the third of C. It's the third note from C, so C, D, E. When the third is in the bass, it's called first inversion. When the fifth is in the bass, G is the fifth of C, it's called second inversion. So the structure of chords. So let's talk more about root notes. They are the generating tone of a given chord. The notes of a chord gain their meaning from the relationship to the root, as well as the tonic. So what determines the root note? The note that most simply explains the presence of the others will be heard as the root. What about more complex chords? Most often there is a simple explanation. So the bass, root, and tonic. These 3 terms are often confused with one another. The bass note, the lowest currently sounding pitch. The root note, this is the generating tone of a current chord. And the tonic, it's the generating tone of a current key. We haven't learned just yet where chords come from, so this may seem a little bit confusing, the difference between a root note and the tonic. As we'll see, a major scale creates chords. So if we used the C major scale to create chords, C would be the tonic of the key. But if we created a chord from one of the other notes, let's say F for example, F would be the root note of that chord. However, C would still be the tonic of that key. We'll be clarifying this in the upcoming lessons. For now, just think about it a little bit. In every moment, these 3 elements are at play in some form. So, chord types. We're going to learn about 3 types of chords together. Up first is major, minor, and diminished. So what do they sound like? Major kind of sounds happy, uplifting, or morning time, I like to think of it as. These terms are totally subjective, and you can decide on the way that major chords feel to you. For me, I find these helpful. Minor, kind of sad, moody, nighttime. Diminished, scary, foreboding, or tense. It's important to start practicing recognizing the sound of chords by ear as soon as possible. With practice, it will become effortless and automatic to hear these chords, and any chord type actually. Major and minor triads form the basis of the most advanced chords. There's a new term here that I'm using, which is triad. All it means is a chord that has 3 notes in it. Tri, 3, 3-noted chord, triad. So, how do we build chords? Major. A major chord is the combination of a root note, a major third interval, and a perfect fifth interval. When we combine them together, we play them at the same time, that's what a major chord is. So this can be distilled down to a formula of a root 3, 5. Technically what that's saying is a root note, a major third, and a perfect fifth. We learned about this when we created major scales together. Up first is major, so I'm going to demonstrate this relative to C. I'm going to grab the 8th fret. I'm going to grab a major third. I'm going to grab a perfect fifth. You may be noticing right away, this is another way to visualize fifths. Keep that in mind. So, C major. You probably know it like this. And you may think, well, I'm playing 5 notes here, but actually there's only 3 because we've got 2 Cs, 2 Es, and a G. And actually any combination of these 3 notes anywhere on the guitar will always be a C major chord. So minor chords, root, minor third, perfect fifth. That can be distilled down to this formula of a root, a flat 3, and a 5. Up next is a minor chord, so we can take that same major chord shape, and if we lower the third, it's going to give us minor. So we root, flat 3, 5, C minor, C, E flat, G. Diminished chords. Root, minor third, and diminished fifth. Here's the formula for diminished chords. Next up are diminished chords. So let's take that same first example we had. We had C, E, G. We lowered the third, C, E flat, G. Now we need to lower the fifth. Diminished chord. So I want to show some similarities between these. So check this out. We can take a major chord and lower its third, and it's a minor chord. That may seem overly obvious, but what it means is that we can take any major chord as a formula, lower the third, and it equals a minor chord. We can take any minor chord, lower its fifth, and that will produce a diminished chord. We could keep going with this. We could take a major chord, lower the third and the fifth, and it's a diminished chord. We can take a diminished chord, raise its fifth, now it's minor. I think you can start to see how this is useful. I'd recommend memorizing the formulas. It's pretty easy. Root 3, 5, root flat 3, 5, root flat 3, flat 5. There's only 3 to memorize. So the benefits of a formula mindset. It's a unifying way to think about and approach any scale or chord. Thinking in this way is very helpful when visualizing the note relationships of the fretboard. Let's jump over to the guitar and I can show you what I mean. Voicing. What is voicing? It's the vertical order of the notes in a chord, the specific order of the notes. So, chord voicing. Let's take this example. The common C major bar chord. There's a little trick here I'd like to show you before moving on. We can say this out loud. 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. That's telling us the order of the intervals and the way that this shape is voiced. A root, 5, root, 3, 5, root. Now, I don't need to play all of these notes. I only need 3 of them, technically, for it to be a C major chord. I could leave out the bottom string. I could even leave out the top 2 strings. Don't need them. I could leave out the A string, the D and the A string. I could skip the A and the E string. Just grab these 3. Or even these 3. All of these are equally C major. However, I'm just choosing how I want to voice the chord. If I'm playing by myself, maybe I want the richness of all the notes. Maybe there's a singer that is singing this, so I'll leave that out intentionally to leave room for them. Let's do the same example relative to the A string now. I'm going to choose C minor this time. We can say out loud, 1, 5, 1, 3, 5. So the pattern's the same. We've got a root, a 5, a root, a flat 3, and a 5. And again, we don't need to play all of these notes to have a C minor chord here. I could leave out the E string, the D string. I could skip the G string. Could just grab these 3. Or even this. Again, depending on the situation, I may choose to voice the chord one way or another. So before there were stringed instruments, there was just the human voice. It's helpful to imagine that every note played in a chord on the guitar is its own individual person singing that note, hence the term voicing. Each voice has its own unique place, distinct from the others in pitch. A simple major chord could be voiced between 3 or 6 notes on the guitar. We have 6 strings, meaning that there are 6 possible voices to play at any given time. When using only 3 notes, there are many potential voicings. So abstract formula versus actual voicing. When a chord is written in a chord chart, for example, C major, it's not telling you, or I, what the order of the notes are, the way that the chord is voiced. And the degrees of a chord do not need to appear in numerical order. There can be duplicate notes that appear in various octaves as well. So the emotional connection. Chords are emotion. They're like a feeling or a picture of emotion. And this is the purpose of chords. Can you hear a chord without feeling anything? This may seem like a strange philosophical question, but the feeling and sound of a chord are contained within one another. You can't really separate them. The range of potential harmonies and feelings is vast beyond measure. The feeling is generated both by the individual chord in movement, the chords that preceded it, and the key center, as we will see. A simple major chord can have many possible feeling states depending on these factors. As we expand into more complex chords, we will become familiar with a myriad of potential feeling states that chords can express. In the next section, we're going to be taking a closer look at the most important way to visualize these chords on the guitar.